Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the online information training entitled ANA Emergency Language Funding, What You Need to Know. This webinar is intended for potential applicants of the Administration for Native Americans Emergency Language Fund, a non-competitive grant to assist with ANA native language programs continuing vitality by addressing COVID-19 related program setbacks. This webinar is hosted by ANA Western Region Training and Technical Assistance Center and the Native Language Community Coordination Training and Technical Assistance Center. We're glad you could join us. This webinar has been pre-recorded. The Administration for Native Americans, or ANA, is a U.S. federal agency with a mission to promote self-sufficiency for Native Americans, Alaska Natives, and Pacific Islanders by providing discretionary grant funding for community-based projects, training, and technical assistance to eligible tribes and Native organizations. ANA envisions a nation where all Native communities are thriving. Today, we will be discussing special funding ANA has been charged by President and Congress to distribute non-competitive funding to aid in the continued vitality of Native language programs that have been severely impacted by COVID-19. Before we begin today's session, I am honored to be able to introduce Ms. Michelle Sauvé, who will deliver a few opening remarks on behalf of ANA. First, a little bit about Ms. Sauvé. She is the Acting Commissioner for the Administration for Native Americans, and under the authority of the Native American Programs Act, Michelle oversees ANA's discretionary funding programs to American Indians, Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. She serves as an advocate for Native Americans and coordinates activities within the United States Department of Health and Human Services, also known as HHS, to develop policies, programs, and budgets affecting Native Americans. As an acting commissioner, Michelle also serves in the dual role of the acting ACF Deputy Assistant Secretary for Native American Affairs, affirming the government-to-government relationship between ACF and the Indian tribes. In addition to her role as acting commissioner and acting deputy assistant secretary, she serves as the executive director of the Interdepartmental Council for Native American Affairs at HHS. Michelle provides coordination across HHS and supports ANA leadership and the council in cross-program collaborations and coordinations on policies impacting Native Americans within HHS. Michelle also serves as the Intergovernmental Affairs Specialist at ANA. Her work includes providing policy and program advice across a variety of issues that impact tribes. In addition, Michelle helps ANA collaborate across federal agencies via participation on various work groups and interagency initiatives. Michelle has been at ANA since December 2010 and previously worked as the Senior Project Consultant and Communications Lead as a contractor for ANA. Michelle is a member of the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe.
Kwekwe, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction, Rondell. Wakanu Morado, I send my utmost respects to you from Washington, D.C. To all the webinar participants and prospective applicants for the ANA Emergency Language Grant Opportunity Announcement. I hope everyone is in good spirits and health as our country is battling this COVID-19 pandemic. In my role at ANA, I oversee ANA's discretionary funding programs to American Indians, Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, which includes preparing funding opportunity announcements, or FOAs, for publication. ANA is authorized in statute under the Native American Programs Act of 1974, also known as NAPA. This gives us the authority to make financial assistance awards to Native communities. The American Rescue Plan Act amended NAPA to create the emergency grants for Native languages. After input provided through tribal consultation, a listening session, and written input, in which some of you may have participated, we have taken many of the ideas presented and created the Emergency Grant for Native American Languages, FOA. The publication of this FOA is the first step in providing funding through the ARPA. The grants are intended to ensure the survival and vitality of Native American languages during and after the public health emergency with respect to the COVID-19 pandemic. We intend this emergency funding to support as many tribal and Native communities as possible in their efforts to maintain and preserve Native languages, as they are also connected to preserving Native culture and well-being. This FOA is special and different from our usual award process in that it will be distributed on equal allocation basis to federal and state recognized tribal governments or designees that have a living language through non-competitive awards, with input from the Administration of Children and Families Office of Grants Policy, Office of Grants Management, the ACF Leadership, and HHS Office of General Counsel. ANA had a team of FOA drafters that worked diligently to produce the Emergency Language FOA. I would like to acknowledge the ANA FOA drafting team, which includes our Director of Program Operations, Ms. Carmia Strickland, Senior Program Specialist, Ms. Rosia Curry, ANA Director of Policy Evaluation and Planning, Ms. Amy Zukowski, Program Specialists Sydney Hurst, Jill Kane, Sierra Wilbar, Max Yamani, and Kate Gordon, and Impact Evaluators Heather Gordon and Travis Roberts. Drafting a new FOA is no small task, so they should all be commended for their dedication to the effort. The team's goal was to ensure that all applicants receive clear information about how to apply for the emergency language grants. Now AGOA team, thank you very much. The application deadline for this FOA is in 30 days, June 25th, 2021, with an estimated project start date of September 7th, 2021. No decision has been made at this time if the due dates will be extended, as this deadline will help ensure we meet the requirement from Congress to have money in your account by September 7th. I recommend that you subscribe to the opportunity on grants.gov if you haven't already, so you will be automatically notified if that date changes. Thank you for your commitment to Native languages. And now back to Rondell.
Thank you, Michelle, for providing a few words and insights about ANA's exciting new funding opportunity for emergency language grants. Before we begin this module, be sure to have a copy of the ANA Emergency Language FOA in front of you. You can pause this video and locate a copy if you don't have it handy. Also, make sure that you have a current version of the FOA with the due date of 6/25/2021. Hi, my name is Rondell Clay. I'm your co-host for today's webinar. I am the Regional Director for the Eastern and Western Regional TNTA Centers. I have been a training and technical assistance provider for ANA since 2000, supporting Alaska, Eastern, and Western regions during my 21 years. I am Dakota and a citizen of the Sistenwapatinoyate in northeastern South Dakota. Maria?
Thank you, Rondell. Hi, my name is Maria Griffin, and I'm also your co-host for today's webinar. I have been the director for the Native Language Community Coordination Training and Technical Assistance Center since it began in 2017. I have provided training and technical assistance to American Indian, Alaska Natives, Pacific Islander grantees for about 15 years in the areas of language, health and wellness, grant management, and project management for a variety of federal agencies, including ANA. I am a citizen of the Spokane Tribe of Indians located in northeastern Washington State. Rondell?
Thanks, Maria. The American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA as it's known, was signed into law by President Biden in March of this year to create emergency grants for Native American language preservation and maintenance, to award grants to eligible entities to receive assistance under subsection A1 to ensure the survival and vitality of Native American language during and after the public health emergency declared by the Secretary with respect to the COVID-19 pandemic. These funds will be used to make emergency awards to eligible recipients to ensure the survival of their language. Native languages and cultures are at a critical point in their existence due to the number of elders and language speakers that have died as a result of COVID-19. This emergency funding is intended to support as many tribal and Native communities as possible in an effort to maintain and preserve Native languages, as these are connected to also preserving Native culture and well-being. In today's training, we're focusing on the creation of the emergency language funding grants through the American Rescue Plan Act for American Indians and Alaska Natives. A separate FOA has been created for Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. This funding is very different from ANA's regular funding. ANA held 2 consultations with potential applicants and tribal leaders to go over the act and solicit input on how to provide these funds to the Native language community. The emergency funding opportunity announcement was developed using that information. ANA has published the emergency funding opportunity announcement. To help you apply for this ANA grant, this training will focus on 2 primary objectives: a review of the emergency language funding opportunity announcement and understanding how to apply for the funding. Let's move on and review the sections of our FOA. The structure and format of each of these ANA FOAs follow an Office of Management and Budget approved structural outline. The FOA is the guide for all applications to follow, and there are 8 parts to each funding opportunity announcement. Section 1 is the program description, which describes the purpose of the FOA and program. This section also provides a brief introduction to the key project features. Section 2 includes information on a number of awards, the award ceiling amounts, project start dates, and the length of the projects allowed. Section 3 has a list of eligible applicant information, non-federal share, a listing of projects ineligible for funding, and application disqualification factors. Section 4, entitled Content and Form of Application Submission, contains information about application formatting requirements. This section provides details on the application content. The project description is the subsection that you need to read thoroughly to understand exactly what information ANA is looking for in the application. Section 5 tells you about the review of the applications. Section 6 covers federal award administration information, such as reporting. Section 7 provides award agency contact information. And Section 8 contains a list of reference websites and an application checklist. In addition to the 8 numbered sections, there is one appendix at the end of the FOA. That appendix is located on page 33 and has a list of definitions of terms used in the FOA that you may wish to reference as you move forward with developing your application. We are going to do our best to follow information as it is presented in the funding opportunity announcement. Therefore, we are starting with an issue addressed in the first section of the FOA. Intellectual property rights is an important issue for tribes with language and cultural programs that use people outside the tribe, such as partners, consultants, or contractors to help with their programs. Potential grantees are encouraged to educate themselves on intellectual property rights and the protection of ownership to language materials, history, music, dance, ceremonies, and other forms of knowledge and cultural practice that originate from Native communities. Moreover, potential grantees are encouraged to learn how such rights may be transferred via contracting with third parties that produce resources, data, materials developed as a result of ANA funding. ANA is unable to provide legal advice or guidance on this matter. However, grant funds may be used for legal expenses relative to this matter. Please see 45 CFR Part 75.322. The federal award information for the grant is on the screen. ANA is providing each applicant with an equal amount of funding. ANA cannot determine the exact amount of each award until after the application deadline, and then determine how many eligible applications were received. They'll calculate that amount by the total amount of funding, $19 million. So, depending on the number of applications that ANA receives, ANA has estimated tribal applicants may be awarded somewhere between $37,000 and $95,000. Again, this is subject to the number of approved applications that come in on time. Tribal applicants or their designees are encouraged to propose a project amount that can be adapted to this range, as budgets will most likely have to be adjusted. Unlike ANA's discretionary grants, these funds are one-time money. So regardless of the number of years you propose for your project, you'll get the entire award amount in year one. There will not be any additional distributions of funds in subsequent years. The good news is that these funds do not have an expiration date, so they can be spent until they're completely gone. As we mentioned before, it should also be noted, ANA is publishing a separate FOA for Pacific Islanders. There are 3 eligible entities for this grant: Native American tribal governments, meaning federally recognized tribes, federally recognized tribes as recognized by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and incorporated state recognized Indian tribes. The eligible tribes may designate one of the following: incorporated nonprofit multi-purpose community-based Indian organizations, nonprofit Native organizations in Alaska with village-specific projects, incorporated nonprofit Native Alaskan multi-purpose community-based organizations, and tribal colleges and universities. Current tribal grantees that are eligible for this funding may apply for their allotment. If the tribe wants to designate another entity to receive the tribe's funding allocation, then the designated entity becomes the applicant organization on behalf of the tribe. The designation must be submitted either by the tribe as an official statement on letterhead or a resolution with the application. Incorporated nonprofit multi-purpose community-based Indian organizations, nonprofit Native organizations in Alaska with village-specific projects, incorporated nonprofit Alaska Native multi-purpose community-based organizations, and tribal colleges and universities are allowed to be designees. The designation must be submitted by the tribe as an official statement and given to the designated entity to include in their application. The document must be included in the application of the designated entity or the application will not be eligible to apply. There are some projects that are ineligible for funding. Third-party TA is one of them. Projects that require funding for feasibility studies, business plans, marketing plans, or written materials such as manuals that are not an essential part of the applicant's long-range development plan. Projects that are core administration functions that essentially support only the applicant's ongoing administrative functions and that are not related to the proposed project. Projects that support ongoing social service delivery programs or the expansion or continuation of existing social service delivery programs. Projects that do not further the three interrelated goals of the economic development, social development, and cultural preservation. Projects from consortia of tribes that do not include documentation from each participating consortium member, supplying their role and support. Projects from consortia must have goals and objectives that will encompass the participating communities. ANA will not fund projects by a consortium of tribes that will duplicate activities for which participating member tribes also received ANA funding from. And finally, the purchase of real estate, which is self-explanatory. Before we get into application specifics, let's take a minute to review the timeline. We had said that this is a different FOA, and that is very evident when you look at the due date of June 25th. Most applicants will be applying via grants.gov electronically. Electronic applications are due at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. For those that don't have the connectivity, they can request an exemption from filing electronically. Those paper grants are due 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Only applications submitted on time will be funded. We will discuss filing an exemption later in the presentation. Upon receipt, applications will be reviewed for eligibility. Once ANA has determined the number of eligible applications, it will calculate the individual allotment amounts. ANA will require updated budgets prior to awarding funds from all eligible applicants. There are three key differences that set this FOA apart from others. Tribes must have a living language in order to qualify for funds. ANA's definitions included in the appendix are on about page 32, and you can find the definition for living language there. No matching funds are required for this grant. This is a non-competitive award. There is no scoring of this application. ANA, again, will screen for eligibility and that all the required application components are provided. This funding opportunity has other differences from ANA applications that you don't see on the screen. For example, this funding opportunity is half the size of a normal ANA funding opportunity. And this is primarily due to being an emergency funding application with very streamlined application requirements. There are not as many components required. There are 5 sections in this application: a 1-page project summary, an approach section that has very different components from other FOAs, budget and budget justification, and finally an attachment section for certifications and other documents to justify your budget and other aspects of your project. The proposed emergency language funding projects must be able to identify one or two of the following domains that will be the focus of your project: resource and documentation, instruction, technology and infrastructure, planning, elder or intergenerational engagement. We will be going through examples for each of these domains in a few minutes. Tribal applications or their designees are encouraged to propose a project that could be adapted, as budgets will most likely have to be adjusted. The amount of the budget is limiting in what can be accomplished during the project period. So please keep focused to one or two domains. I'm going to turn it now over to Maria, and she is going to explain the beginning section of the application. Maria?
Great, thank you, Rondell. And we'll go ahead and start on the domains. So this section of the webinar will review each domain, reference the example found in the FOA, and provide a list of possible projects that can be completed for about $40,000. Domain 1 is resources and documentation, and you'll find the following examples provided in the FOA: language instruction modules, recordings, transcribing, curriculum development, and dictionary building. A few example projects that you might consider or find inspiration from include inventory of language materials and human resources currently available in and around your community, transcribing audio and video recordings that your community currently has, creating family and teaching games for language learning, self-publishing books, building a grammar database, or creating a learning sequence for curriculum development. Domain 2 is instruction, and you'll find the following examples provided in the FOA. You'll see teacher training, professional development, and master apprentice. Some possible projects that you might consider under Domain 2 include sending language staff to conference or meetings so they can network, meet other organizations, and find new ideas. Create games for learning language such as board games, card games, matching games, etc. Credentialing for teachers is a process and needs lots of planning and researching on how to make this work for your community. So that in itself would be a definite $40,000 project. You might also consider incentives for students to learn the language, and it's very important because it's very difficult to maintain a full-time job, care for family members, and take courses in learning language. Incentives go a long way into bridging some of the gaps encountered by students. And last we have on here is incentives for family engagement, which is also important. Providing incentives such as transportation or childcare costs can help with ensuring the entire family is committed to learning the language. Technology and infrastructure is Domain 3. FOA examples include computers, devices, internet enhancements, IT, and IT networking. A few Domain 3 example projects that you might consider include creating or revamping a language website, purchasing online or technology subscriptions to applications that can assist in curriculum and materials development for teachers and students, researching and evaluating language applications for use in the community. You may end up purchasing these applications at full cost or partial cost with assistance from another grant or community partner. Purchasing hardware such as laptops, notebooks, headsets with microphones, mobile hotspot devices, etc. Training to teach staff on how to use equipment. Cleaning up any audio and video files for better transcription, and you may have to purchase software or online applications to do that. Transferring old audio and video recordings from obsolete formats to a digital format, and then also creating computer games or books for students and teachers. Domain 4 focuses on planning. Examples provided in the FOA include surveys, community readiness or interest assessment, and strategic plan. Some example projects include a community assessment, then using the information to develop a strategic plan for language in your community. Planning incentives for community engagement may seem not to matter, but it really does. If you want community members to engage in the assessment or strategic planning process, then consider providing transportation or childcare incentives. Also, hiring staff or a contractor to conduct the strategic planning, as well as performing assessments on the status of the language, would go a long way in getting this domain completed. And the last domain is as important as the previous 4. Elder intergenerational engagement is domain 5. Examples listed in the FOA include elder language instruction, elder storytelling in the language, and elder speaking recordings. A few domain 5 example projects that you might consider or find inspiration from include transcribing audio or video recordings of stories and conversations from previous years, recording elders' conversations and stories. In other words, make new recordings. The new recordings can include conversations among 2 or more elders, having them tell the same story, but made from different perspectives. And the last one on our list here is incentives for elder engagement. The incentive can help out elders and allow them to feel more independent because they are earning their way and are being compensated for their time and expertise. All of these examples that I've given you are lessons learned from the Native Language Community Coordination, and our grantees have been using those type of things for their grant. On the next slide, we're going to talk about the approach component of the application, as it is a very important aspect of the FOA. And as you've heard before, it is different from the other FOAs that we have for ANA. So on this slide, it provides the information that you will find in the approach. You see their geographic location, the name of language being addressed, and the impact of COVID in your language. And then again, the status of the language is to set the stage for what you want to use funds for. Funds must be spent on 1 or 2 of the domains listed in the FOA, which we've already gone over. And once you've determined the domains you'll need to write a project goal that addresses both domains and one SMART or specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound objective per domain. And there's a maximum of 2 objectives for this FOA. Once you've written your objectives, you'll need a measurable outcome for each objective, again, a maximum of 2 outcomes that clearly relates to the domains you are addressing. You will need to plan for measuring the success of achieving your objectives and outcomes. In the plan, discuss what the data are you are collecting to determine success, how you are collecting them, whether it be a spreadsheet, database, daily logs, etc., who is collecting and who is aggregating the data, and who is reporting on what was found and to whom they are reporting. We'll go over each of these components in the upcoming slides. We have included examples in the upcoming slides for name of the language, COVID-19 impact on language, status of the language, choice of domain, project goal, objectives, and outcomes. Our example tribe is the Peoples Tribe. All our examples will focus on this tribe and their language project. Please keep in mind, we will not address every single component that you see on this slide. Please feel free to use this slide as a check on your approach sections. So we're starting with our example project. I'd like to give you some background, and it will help us explain some of the new areas of the FOA. So that's why we're having this fictitious tribe here. And so here's the background of our Peoples Tribe. The Peoples Tribe members are healthy, vibrant, and self-sufficient. As a tribe, they worked on a strategic plan to determine what priorities the community felt needed to be addressed over the next 5 years. The plan shows 8 priorities, and language preservation was ranked number 2 on their list. The Peoples Tribe members speak Peoplese, with a few of their tribal members who speak the language, which are mostly elders and mentors in the language program. So as noted in the previous slide on approach, to help explain some of the new areas of the FOA, we are providing this example on domains. The domain the Peoples Tribe has chosen is resources and documentation. And I want you to be aware of that this is just an example. You are under no way obligated to choose this particular domain. Please choose a domain that actually fits with your project. We are going to be talking about these things that are found in section 4 under the project description. So in the FOA asks you to clearly identify how COVID-19 impacted the state of language and/or language learning in your community. For the language program in the Peoples Tribe, they weren't able to provide any community classes either in person due to COVID-19 or virtually because of no internet capability. The FOA also asks you to provide the name of the native languages to be addressed by the project. For our example, the Peoples tribal language is called Peoplese. The FOA asks you to provide the status of the language. If you know the status, the number of speakers, and number of resources. The Peoples Tribe are unsure of their status of their language, but have looked at the expanded graded intergenerational disruption scale, which I'll go into on the next slide, and believe that the Peoplese is critically endangered. Since their project will include resources available and teacher capacity, they can only provide what they know about the language program and what it has on hand, which is 2 employees who provide language lessons to the tribal agencies and community events, specifically on naming and basic phrases. And they commonly use 10 handouts and booklets to help in their classes. As I referenced in the previous slide, to gauge the status of the language, the scale accepted worldwide is the Expanded Graded Intergenerational Disruption Scale, or EGIDS, however you want to pronounce that. It is a tool that was developed by Lewis and Simons in 2010, and it measures a language's status in terms of endangerment or development. The UNESCO, or the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization column, to the very far right, identifies the language endangerment in alignment with the levels in the first column. You can use the scale to determine the status of your language to answer the FOA requirement, or you can use other scales that are out there. It's your decision. For the Peoples Tribe, they identified their language to be at 8B, nearly extinct. Speakers are elderly and have little opportunity to use the language and therefore critically endangered. They identified that the 2 speakers who currently use the language don't consider themselves to be elderly, but they have very little opportunity to speak the language in conversation. So level 8B seems to fit the best. So you may use the same type of thought processes. You may not have that they're very elderly, but they have very little time to talk with one another. So use the scales as you need to determine your status of your language. On this slide, we'll take a quick look at the approach components and how they are related to one another. So this slide depicts the connections between the most pieces of the approach. And as you can see, the domain or domains chosen will determine the goal. State 1 project goal and no more than 2 objectives that will occur according to the FOA. Ensure the survival and continuing vitality of Native American languages to be achieved by the project during and after the public or health emergency, unquote. And then the objectives must meet the goal. And based on the goal, each objective should have one measurable outcome that indicates the successful accomplishment of the objective and ultimately the goal. So the next pieces on here underneath the outcome is milestones, which are basically key activities that are implemented for each of your objectives. Although not seen here or required by the FOA, outputs may be a part of your project. We will cover each of these items in more detail soon. So starting off with the project goal statement, and that should be a single statement that is to point and reflects the scope of the project, or rather the domain. A direct correlation between the selected domain that are being addressed and the project goal needs to happen. The project goal improves, reduces, eliminates, or increases the capacity of your community or language program to address that particular domain you chose. The project goal should be achieved by the end of the project period. Be sure the goal is achievable and within the timeline allotted for the project. Now, as Rondell pointed out earlier, that although you're getting your money in the first year, you have up until 36 months to complete that and spend all the money. So make sure you have enough time in there to complete your goal with the money that you'll be receiving. So for example, we have here the Peoples Tribe had determined that they needed to know whether they had any materials and teachers available in their community. So this is a question that was posed in their strategic plan. So their goal was written as determine the availability of teaching resources and teachers. And as you can see with the illustrated piece here that says goal, what do we want to achieve? And that's a question you need to remember to ask yourself. The next part is the objectives. Now, the objectives should align with the project goal, as we mentioned earlier under the approach components. So applicants may format their objectives using the SMART format, which is, again, as we said, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So specific means it's a specific area for improvement. Measurable provides a quantifiable target to show the amount of change. Achievable is given the proposed timeframe, approach, and resources. Is that project going to be able to achieve its goal? And then relevant means, is this objective relevant to the project goal? And time-bound is how long will it take to complete the objective? So that you have a maximum of 2 objectives to do this in. So for example, the Peoples Tribe identified 2 project objectives. The first objective would be to research and catalog at least 50% of the teaching resources in both hard copy and soft copy that are currently available in the community over the 12 months of the project. And objective 2 is to research and create a registry of all available language teachers. Additionally, the project team will assess the proficiency levels of at least 25% of the teachers identified over the 12 months. However, the People's Tribe are a little hesitant about having 2 objectives for the potential of a $40,000 award. When they start writing the approach, they may find that the 2 project objectives will be too ambitious for 1 year's worth of work. As they continue working on their application and specifically their approach, they may need to revise objective 2 to only research and creating a registry of all available teachers and leave the assessment piece to another grant. If more money were available, they will include the original objective 2 in full. This is a very important aspect for you as applicants to remember. You have up to 36 months to start a project and finish it, and you may not have enough grant funds to complete all that you want to. So please remember that all of the grant funds will be awarded in year 1, and you can continue to spend the funds until they are gone. The drawdown of funds may be completed in year 1, year 2, or year 3. It just depends on your project and the key activities or milestones that are needed to be completed. Talk with others in your community. Get a good idea of what can feasibly be done in 12, 24, 36 months. Take into account any approvals that need to be made. The processes may be long and slow down the activities you made to complete for your project and objectives. So on the slide, you'll notice too that the objective is a question. How are we going to achieve it? So goal was what, objective is how. For outcomes, these clearly describe the anticipated measurable outcome of the project. So what domains will be targeted? So as you know, you need to select one domain per objective. There should be a clear connection between the domain and goal to the outcome, in other words, connect to the project. So all of these things are related to one another. Include a plan for measuring the success of the project based on the project goal, objectives, and outcomes. On our example for project outcomes, we note that outcomes are also a positive change occurring within your community as a result of your project. So some desired outcome questions to answer are: what will change? Who will it change for? And how will it be measured? So completing the activities and milestones for objective 1, the People's Tribe language program will know the number and type of resources available to teach language. They may be able to identify gaps in their knowledge base that need to be filled with additional materials. Their outcome is definitely a complete inventory of language resources. So what will change? Well, what will change is that they'll have a complete inventory of teaching resources for Peopleese, and for whom they will change for is the language program staff as well as the community. And how will it be measured? They will be counting the amount of language resources gathered, also known as language resources data. For objective 2, if they decide to move forward with this, the People's Tribe language program will know how many teachers they have and how many more they need to ensure effective language transfer to community members. So their outcome of a comprehensive database of teachers and their language proficiency levels is extremely important. That'll give them an idea of where they need to go with their language program. So for objective 2, what will change? They will have a complete registry of teachers with language proficiency levels. And it's for the People's Tribal Language Program staff as well as the community, so everybody will know who their teachers are and how fluent they are in Peopleese. And it will be measured by using a specific language proficiency assessment that covers reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So that's something that they need to remember when they're doing their outcomes. On the next slide, we will go back to Rondell. She will continue on with the approach pieces. Rondell.
Thank you, Maria. We have one last section of the approach to discuss. In this FOA, issues regarding organizational capacity are discussed under the approach narrative. There are 3 issues you will need to discuss here: staff, partner oversight, and fiscal oversight. The staffing section requires the typical information about staff. Who are the people that will implement the project? What are their roles, and what is their experience and their qualifications for fulfilling those roles? Clearly identify the person who will be overseeing and managing the project. Brief staff bios that provide summaries of each person's qualifications and experience should be provided in the narrative. The next two elements address oversight. First, oversight of the partners. If the project is using partners, contractors, subcontractors, or consultants to work on project activities, then the application should include information on who will be managing their work and performance at the project level. The application should also attach any third-party agreements or contracts. This application should then describe plans for fiscal oversight. Organizations that receive funding are required to comply with applicable tribal, state, and federal regulations related to oversight of grants and awards, as well as their own policies and procedures, which should include proper checks and balances when authorizing expenditures and drawdowns of grant funds. In this part of the application, there should be a description of the overall finance department and their policies and procedures. The application approach should demonstrate that the tribe has knowledge or experience in following federal cost principles, proper and timely disbursement of funds, and accurate accounting practices. This can be demonstrated in multiple ways. For example, the application can describe how the current fiscal policies and procedures align with the federal cost principles in the areas of allowability and reasonableness of cost. They could describe their history successfully managing grants with similar funding amounts, and they could describe their history of clean audits. Now that we've covered the entire approach section, we will move on to the required work plan. It is strongly suggested that you build your work plan before writing the approach narrative. It will help you to focus the narrative. The work plan is a guide to the implementation of the project. It will also help with monitoring of the project. Please note there is no specific format for the work plan. However, the FOA does specify information that the work plan should contain. The OWP should provide sufficient information to be used as a blueprint to implement the project. It should provide information on no more than 25 milestone or key activities, who is responsible for completing activities, when they will occur, and what the outputs are. Outputs being products that are produced by completing the activities. The work plan should be organized to show what needs to happen from start to finish to achieve objectives. Therefore, the start date should be chronological and should show a step-by-step progression to achieving the objective. You will have one work plan for each objective. In order for you to use the OWP as a tool for project implementation, ANA requires the inclusion of administrative activities to be listed in the work plan. Please note that administrative activities are not milestone activities. They do not count towards the 25 milestone activity limit. Examples of administrative activities are the post-award training and the grantee meeting. You will be required to attend them. They will be virtual, and they should be included in your work plan. This is a representation of the ANA OWP format. It has all the elements the FOA is asking for in a work plan. It is in the workspace application package and ready for you to fill out. However, you are not required to use it. This is the last component of the application, and it contains exactly what the title says, a line item budget and budget justification narrative. Let's look at the line item budget. A detailed line item budget lists each anticipated expenditure for the project. ANA requires a line item budget using the federal object class categories that fully details the costs allocated for the project. The line item budget should only include costs that align with the approach and the work plan. The object class categories do not necessarily align with the ones your finance office uses. Please use these categories listed in the FOA for your application. This is a depiction of the project budget using the budget template. Please note between the federal share and total columns is a column entitled non-federal share. As the FOA does not require non-federal share, you will leave that column blank if you use the template. Remember, this budget is your estimate of what you will cost to implement your project as outlined in the approach narrative. Your initial budget should be at or below the ceiling of $95,000. This budget will be replaced with a new budget once ANA determines the actual allocation amount, which will happen after the application deadline. The contact person listed on the SF-424 form will be contacted by ANA with a request for a new budget for the final allocation amount and any other information they may need in order to make an award. The budget justification is the companion to the line item budget and is a narrative breakdown of the line item costs along with a brief explanation of why they are necessary for the projects. Calculations should be included to show how all costs were determined. For example, if the line item budget includes costs to print manuals, then the budget justification should state the number of manuals they are printing and the cost per manual. The result should equal the cost identified in the line item budget. As you are developing the budget justification, make sure you have discussed how all costs requested are necessary for implementation and how they align with the activities in the approach. Documentation such as vendor quotes are recommended for large ticket items over $5,000 or unique items or specialty equipment to justify these large expenditures. If the project is using consultants, a scope of work and price quote with an itemization of the work for the consultant are requested. The example provided shows you the format that ANA is used to seeing in a budget justification. ANA has an application toolkit that contains a budget template. The budget template is in a format ANA prefers. It has all the correct object class categories in it. The subtotals and totals are formula based. The line item budget is linked to its corresponding budget justification. Descriptions and subtotals for each object class category are linked with the line item budget as well. For the emergency language FOA, you do not have to fill in the non-federal share column. The toolkit is available on the ANA website. This list is not all inclusive. It only includes items mentioned in the FOA. You may include as many attachments as you need to. There are no page limits for this application. However, ANA is not expecting volumes, only include the documents required by the FOA or those that are necessary to help understand your project. A project summary is required. The project summary is a single-spaced, single-page document that provides information about the applicant and a summary of the project description. It should be clear, accurate, concise, and without cross-references to other parts of the application. The summary should be a brief description of the polluting needs to be addressed, the proposed services, the population group that is to be served. Please place indented bullet items at the top of the page and the summary description of the project after it. Now we're talking about additional required documentation. We have listed the additional required documentation as they are listed in the FOA. The top 3 documents are required to be in the application at time of submission in order for the tribally designated applicant to pass the internal screening and be deemed eligible for funding. While ANA strongly suggests the governing body documentation of approval for submission of the application be included with the funding application when submitted, ANA will accept this after the application is received, but before funding can be awarded. The screen shows an example of a list of board of directors. This is not required as the format for this information. Tribal designees must provide a list of their board of directors and each member's affiliation to the Native community that ANA serves. Tribes are not required to submit this information. This is a list of the required federal forms. The top 3 are included in the application on Workspace in grants.gov. The bottom 3 you will need to fill out and upload as an attachment. The maintenance of effort certification is a statement that needs to be copied and pasted onto applicant stationery and signed by your authorizing official. If you have trouble finding the MOE statement, please contact one of the regional TA centers. Although most applications will be submitted electronically through grants.gov. Grants.gov will not allow you to apply if you do not have a DUNS number and an active SAM.gov registration. If you have never applied for federal funding through grants.gov, you will need to make sure you are registered in SAM and grants.gov prior to putting your application together. These registrations require time to process through the systems, so we strongly encourage you to look into this right away. Generally, somebody in the tribal administration or finance office handles these accounts as they are needed to apply for funding across the government. Please check with your executive office or finance office to see if your tribe already has these in place. Do not create new accounts without talking to the administrative offices. Issues with duplicate DUNS numbers and SAM registrations can cause applications to be rejected. Funding restrictions. At the end of Section 4 of the FOA, there is a list of specific things that ANA does not fund. The current screen lists what those are. ANA cannot fund an application that contains any of these items. Applying for an exemption online. The FOA provides a link to the policy for requesting an exemption from applying online. To receive an exemption from required electronic application submission, applicants must submit a written request to ACF that must state that the applicant qualifies for the exemption for one of the following two reasons: lack of internet access or internet connection, limited computer capacity that prevents the uploading of large documents or document files at grants.gov. Those are the only two reasons that you can file by submitting to the email address electronic app exemption at acf.hhs.gov, or sending a written request to the Office of Grants Management contact listed in Section 7, HHS Awarding Agency Contacts of the announcement. Exemption request must, no less than 14 days before the application is due. What you see is the application format for electronic applications. Pages should be set up to be single-sided, 8.5, with a 1-inch margin on all sides. If possible, do not scan documents unless you absolutely have to. If you do have to scan, make sure the scanned documents are easily readable and that you only put one scanned document per page. Also, although it isn't required, it is strongly suggested that you number your application pages. It helps with developing the table of contents. This is the paper format, which is identical to the electronic format, 8.5 by 11 white paper, 1-inch margins all around, requesting page numbers, the scanning information. What's different is the delivery labeling for sending your application package into ACF. It requires that you have the FOA title and funding opportunity number on the packaging. File naming. This is especially important for language projects. Do not use native language fonts or typefaces or words to label files, as native language diacritical markings may not be read by the system and could cause a validation error. Make sure you're familiar with this file naming convention so that you avoid any problems with submission. There is a review and selection process that is in Section 5. All applications that are screened as eligible will receive an equal allocation award based on division of the total number of applications received from the federal and state recognized tribes. The criteria being used for screening applications: is the applicant a federally or state recognized tribe? If not, have they been designated by a federal or state recognized tribe to receive their allocation? Has only one application been received per federal or state recognized tribe? Only one will be funded. Has the tribe documented the status of their living language? Does the application propose projects that align with one of the 5 domains that will preserve and protect the vitality of the applicant's native language? In addition to the questions above, No grant award will be made under this announcement with an incomplete application. No grant award will be made to an application or subrecipient that does not have a DUNS number. The federal award information is contained in section 6, which starts on about page 29. The important part is that you need to know is that you will get a notice of award to notify you that you have a grant. Second, there is required semi-annual performance progress reports and financial reports. And you will get more details of those at the post-award. Just a recap of important information to remember. This application, as well as the FOA, are streamlined. The final allocation amount will not be determined until after the deadline. All applications must have governing body documentation that clearly state that the governing body approved the submission of the application. Tribal designee applicants must include governing body documentation from the tribe that they have been designated to receive their allotment. The ANA OWP form is optional, but a work plan is required, and you must include the information specified in the FOA. This is one of the most important reminders. You only have until June 25th of this year to get your applications in. Those of you who file electronically are due at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. So be sure to calculate what 11:59 Eastern Time is going to look like from your time zone. Paper applications are due at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Late applications will not receive an allotment. The deadline is non-negotiable. Please get your applications in on time. All right. I am going to turn it back over to Maria for some final thoughts.
Thank you, Rondell. So when thinking about creating your project, you might want to consider the following. Be creative. Look at your cultural and ceremonial activities. How can language be used to support your traditions? Don't forget the people who will be speaking the language. Ask them what or how they would like to learn, especially ask the elders about sharing their stories and youth about how they like to learn. Also, based on our conversation today, if you have the time and the budget, consider combining domains. Be sure to list out all the tools, labor, and materials needed for each activity that you identify for your objectives, so that you can determine the timeline and the best use of funds when you're working on your budgets. And I think that's everything other than that. So thank you, Rondell.
Thank you, Maria. ANA is very supportive of all its applicants. And so in section 7 of the FOA on page 29, you are given the agency contacts, Carmelia Strickland and Tim Chappell. Some of their information is on this slide, but the full information is in the FOA. There are application resources, several links provided in FOA section 8. Should you have any questions, please feel free to contact the ANA Help Desk or your Regional Training and Technical Assistance Center. Contact information is on this slide, but it is also on the ANA website. Technical assistance is free, so please take advantage of it. On behalf of the Administration for Native Americans and the Training and Technical Assistance Center, we thank you for listening to this webinar.